He was just another quiet kid, the type nobody really notices, the type who keeps his head down and his mouth shut until the morning he didn't. One bag at his feet, one door that closed behind him for good. And just like that, the whole story flipped on its axis. That was the moment she made the biggest miscalculation of her entire life. What he did next wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was the kind of move you don't see coming because nobody actually believes a kid like that has it in him. The kind nobody warns you about. The kind that doesn't just settle a score, it rewrites the whole damn ledger. Don't leave yet. We're about to open something some people really didn't want opened. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let us know where you're tuning in from. There was no cake waiting for me when I turned 19. No candles, no song, not even a half-hearted happy birthday tossed in my direction. What I got instead was a canvas duffel bag landing at my feet with a dull thud and a stare from my mother so cold it cut deeper than the December wind howling through our busted front door. She stood there with her arms folded tight across her chest, her mouth pressed into a hard line, and she said the words I'll probably hear in my head until the day I die. "You're a grown man now, Mason. Time you figured this whole life thing out yourself." Then she just turned around, walked back into the kitchen, like she hadn't just shoved her only kid into the street with nothing but the clothes on his back and $0 to his name. And there I was, standing in sneakers that had seen better years and a blazer I'd dug out of a thrift store bin, gripping the handles of a bag I had absolutely no memory of packing. It hit me later that she must have stuffed it the night before, while I was still curled up in bed, dreaming these dumb, soft little dreams about what it meant to become a man. In my head, adulthood meant freedom. In hers, it meant getting rid of me. So, I waited. I genuinely waited at that door, hoping she'd open it again, hoping she'd at least drive me to the bus station like a halfway decent human being. She didn't. The door clicked shut behind me, and that little click carried more weight than every fight we'd ever screamed our way through. Just like that, I had nowhere to go. Happy birthday to me, right? Okay, look, before you write me off as some whiny kid throwing a tantrum about having to grow up, let me back this whole thing up. My name is Mason, and when this all went down, I was still a high school student. Yeah, 19 sounds old for that, but I wasn't even halfway through my senior year yet. I pulled solid grades. I worked part-time bagging stuff at a tiny corner grocery. I kept my head down. You wouldn't catch me at parties, you wouldn't catch me in trouble, you wouldn't catch me anywhere I shouldn't be. By every reasonable measure, I was exactly the kind of kid who deserved a shot, or at the very minimum, a roof over my head until I had a diploma in my hand. But to my mother? The second the calendar said I was legally an adult, I stopped being her problem. It had always been just the two of us. My father, ghost. Never around, never mentioned, never anything. When I was about 8 years old, I made the mistake of asking about him once, and her answer was a slammed cabinet door and a silence so loud it taught me everything I needed to know. I never brought it up again. She bounced between odd jobs to keep us afloat, scrubbing floors in other people's houses, waiting tables, and every now and then she'd just disappear for a week or two and come back with a thicker wad of cash and fresh bruises she didn't want to explain. When she was actually home, she was running on fumes, or boiling with rage, or both at the same time. So I tried. God, I tried. I never gave her a fresh excuse to start yelling. I kept our apartment spotless. I learned to throw together basic meals on my own. I made up stories for the teachers when she ghosted parent-teacher conferences. What I figured out way too young was that love in our house came with a price tag. She never once said the words, "I love you." Not casually, not seriously, not by accident. There were no hugs, no warmth, no affection of any kind. Just rules, demands, and buckets of guilt poured over my head whenever it suited her. Ask for a new pair of shoes? Suddenly I was ungrateful. Bring home an A? Should have been an A+. Stay quiet? I was sulking. Speak up? I was disrespectful. The bar kept moving, and no matter how high I jumped, I never quite cleared it. But still, I held on to this stupid little flame of hope that 19 would be the year. That she'd finally see how hard I'd been trying. That she'd say something, anything, even if it wasn't the L word. I wasn't expecting some big celebration we couldn't afford, just maybe a meal together, a quiet night, something. I was naive enough to think she'd care. Turns out she'd been counting down the days, just waiting for the moment she could finally dust her hands of me for good. The night before my birthday, I'd come home from a shift to find her in one of those moods. You know the kind. She was chain-smoking by the window and pacing back and forth like a caged animal. I kept my mouth shut. I knew the drill, but I offered to warm up some leftover noodles, just trying to be useful. She waved me off without a single word. Later that night, through the wall, I heard her on the phone in her bedroom, going off on whoever was on the other end. Most of it I couldn't make out, but one sentence punched right through the drywall and lodged itself in my chest. He turns 19 tomorrow. I don't owe him a damn thing. I lay there for hours after that, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I'd misheard her, that she didn't really mean it. But somewhere down deep, in the part of you that always knows the truth before your brain wants to admit it, I already knew. And honestly, I think I'd known for a really long time. She'd been hunting for a reason, an exit. She wanted her life back, whatever that even meant in her head, and I was the obstacle. I was her burden. I was her excuse. I was her guilt, walking around in sneakers. Morning came, and it came quiet. No breakfast smells, no good morning. Just that bag sitting by the door, and those frozen words hanging in the air. You're an adult now. Go figure it out yourself. I didn't cry. Not then, anyway. I just nodded, slow and small, and I walked out, and the strangest thing was how much it felt like I was leaving behind something that had cracked apart years before I ever noticed. I walked about 3 kilometers to a little park I used to play in as a kid, sank down onto a bench so cold it bit through my jeans, and I unzipped the bag. Inside, 3 pairs of jeans, 4 shirts, 1 hoodie, a toothbrush, and that was it. The $25 I'd hidden in an envelope under my mattress, gone. She'd taken that too. I guess in her mind, I wouldn't be needing it. That was the first cut, the opening wound. That night, I was huddled in the back corner of a laundromat with my hood pulled up, listening to the dryers rumble and trying to figure out what came next. The week after that just blurred. I slept on park benches when I could, ate whatever the few coins in my pocket could buy, snuck into the gym I had a cheap student pass for and used the showers when nobody was watching. I didn't tell a single soul at school. Couldn't. Pride and shame had me in a chokehold, so I kept showing up to class, wrecked and starving, putting on this performance like everything was perfectly normal. The teachers started to clock it. I'd catch the whispers in the hallway, the side glances. He doesn't look right. Something's going on with Mason. But nobody actually came up to me and asked. Nobody, that is, except one woman. Her name was Mrs. Hollis, and she was my guidance counselor. She pulled me aside one afternoon into her office and shut the door behind us. And here's the thing about her. She was one of the very few grown-ups in my life who actually looked me in the eyes when she spoke. Like, really looked. She asked me, soft and serious, if everything was okay at home. I opened my mouth to lie. I had the lie ready, but the truth came pouring out instead, and I couldn't have stopped it if I'd tried. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't even flinch, really. She just sat there and listened to me, and, I mean genuinely listened, the kind of listening where you can feel somebody actually taking your words in instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. And then she got moving. Mrs. Hollis went into full mission mode. She walked me through the paperwork for emergency housing. She had a quiet word with the principal about getting me on the free lunch program, and she even pulled a favor from a local outreach group that worked with kids in exactly my kind of mess. Now look, I didn't want any of it. Charity made my skin crawl, but I'd run out of options, and beggars don't get to be picky, do they? That tiny lifeline she threw me, that was the only thing keeping me breathing. And on the other end of all this, total radio silence from my mother. No phone calls, no texts, not so much as a single word. She'd erased me like a typo on a page. I was gone from her life, and that was exactly the way she'd wanted it from the start. But here's the thing. Nobody knew. Every single night, when I climbed into that thin little shelter bunk and pulled the blanket up to my chin, I made myself the same quiet promise. One day she would regret every single thing she said to me. One day I'd be standing somewhere so far above whatever she ever pictured for me that she wouldn't be able to look away. Not because I wanted her to clap for me, not because I needed her validation anymore. That ship had sailed, sunk, and rotted on the ocean floor. I just needed her to know, deep in her bones, that she'd been wrong. About me. About all of it. And when that moment finally arrived, I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw a punch. I was just going to smile, turn around, and walk away. I didn't have the blueprint yet. I didn't know how I'd pull it off. But one thing was carved in stone in my chest. She would regret it. Every word, every syllable. And weirdly enough, the very first crack in her armor came along just a few weeks later, when I stumbled onto a piece of the truth she never in a million years thought I'd find. For weeks after she shoved me out the door, I kept feeding myself this fairy tale that the whole thing was temporary, that she'd snap out of it, that maybe she was just stressed or scared or drowning in something I couldn't see, and once the fog lifted, she'd come knocking. I held on to that little fantasy like it was the last rope on a sinking ship. Because, think about it. If your own mother can chuck you out like a bag of trash and feel absolutely nothing, what does that say about you? What does it say about what you're worth? But she never came knocking. And the deeper I dug, the more obvious it became that this whole thing hadn't been some impulsive blow-up. She'd been building toward it, quietly, for a long, long time. Mrs. Hollis got me plugged into a local youth shelter program, and it wasn't anything fancy, trust me. A bunk bed in a room I shared with 3 other guys, a chore rotation chart on the fridge, mandatory group sessions twice a week. But it was warm. It was safe. And for the first time in I couldn't remember how long, it was mine. I felt this strange new thing in my chest. Steadiness. I picked up extra hours at the grocery store, took every overnight shift they'd throw at me, kept my head buried in textbooks, kept my grades climbing. My social life? What social life? It evaporated, and honestly, I didn't have the bandwidth to mourn it. Every minute I had was poured into staying alive. There wasn't time to actually feel any of what was happening to me, not until one bone-cold Thursday afternoon at the tail end of January. That's when everything cracked wide open. I was outside the community center where I'd been logging volunteer hours, and I literally walked straight into Mrs. Brennan, our old neighbor from the building. She was bundled up in this giant puffer coat, walking her tiny little dog around the block. She spotted me immediately, even though I'm pretty sure I looked like I'd aged a full decade since the last time she'd seen me. "Oh my God, Mason," she gasped, clutching her coat tighter against the wind. "Honey, are you okay? Your mom told everyone you went off to college early." I just kind of blinked at her. College? She nodded like this was old news. Apparently, that was the story my mother had been spinning around the building. That I'd landed some scholarship and packed up and left on my birthday, off chasing my big bright future. Mrs. Brennan said she'd just been chatting with Mrs. Whitcomb about it the other day, talking about how proud my mother was, how I was becoming a real man, finally launching my own life. Proud. Proud? I just stood there, frozen on the sidewalk, trying to make my face do something that wasn't pure shock. This woman, my own mother, hadn't sent me a single text, hadn't shown up to the January meeting at school where parents were supposed to RSVP about cap and gown fees for graduation. And yet, here she was, out in the world, performing the role of a glowing, supportive parent for whoever would listen. Meanwhile, I was sleeping on a borrowed mattress, slurping instant ramen out of a styrofoam cup, sniffing my school uniform every morning to make sure it didn't reek of industrial laundry soap. That conversation was the first hairline fracture in the lie. And once it cracked, the whole thing started crumbling fast, because as it turned out, my mother hadn't just thrown me away. Oh no, she'd replaced me. Her younger sister, my Aunt Denise, had flown up from Arizona barely a week after my birthday. I had no clue any of this was even happening until one of the younger kids from the building slid into my Instagram DMs out of nowhere with this message. "Hey, your cousin's living at your place now. What happened, Mason?" My cousin? I didn't even know I had a cousin. Curiosity got its claws into me, and underneath it, something colder, something closer to dread. So I started digging. Aunt Denise had a son a few years younger than me, somewhere around 16. His name was Tyler. The last name clicked something in my brain because I used to sort the mail down in our building's lobby, and I'd seen it before. And as I poked around online, the picture got uglier. Tyler had been bouncing in and out of group homes for years. Trouble at school, petty theft, basically every single thing my mother used to accuse me of whenever she got worked up, except I'd never actually done any of it. He had, and now he was tucked into my bed, wearing my old hoodie, raiding the fridge that I used to stock with groceries I'd paid for out of my own paycheck. And my mother was on Instagram posting these cheery little selfies with him, captions like, "So proud of my nephew, new beginnings," with a red heart emoji, nephew, not son. The son had been quietly deleted from the timeline, disappeared. I cannot describe to you how it felt. It was like floating above my own life, watching some stranger live in the wreckage of who I used to be. Like somebody had taken a hacksaw to the foundation of my entire identity and just walked off, leaving me wobbling on the splinters. The one human being on this earth who was supposed to love me without conditions had decided to rewrite her whole story, and I'd been airbrushed clean out of the picture. But I still wasn't angry, not yet. Not until I found the envelope. I was at school helping Mrs. Hollis sort through a mountain of mail for a charity drive she was running. Just stacks and stacks of stuff, scholarship offers, community newsletters, late report cards. And then I spotted it. One envelope in the pile had my name printed across the front. Thick paper, official looking, the kind of envelope that just feels important the second you pick it up. Postmarked December 2nd, addressed to my home. Inside was a letter from Brookhaven Technical College, dated and waiting, offering me a full-ride scholarship to their business management program, a monthly stipend on top of it, housing options specifically reserved for low-income applicants. Everything, the whole package, a complete escape hatch out of the life I'd been crawling through. I just stood there, holding that paper. For what felt like a full minute, my brain wouldn't connect the dots. And then it did, and the floor dropped out from under me. She'd gotten the letter. My mother had gotten this letter. It had landed in our mailbox more than 2 weeks before my birthday. She knew. She knew there was a way out for me, a real one, and she said nothing, not a word. She just let me walk out the door on December 17th like I had nothing and nobody, while this golden ticket sat hidden somewhere in our apartment. My hands started shaking as I folded the letter back into the envelope. "Mrs. Hollis," I said, and my voice barely made it out. "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" She looked up from her stack of papers. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you know if it's actually legal for a parent to turn down a college offer on their kid's behalf?" Her eyes sharpened in a heartbeat. "Mason, what did you find?" I slid the envelope across her desk. She read it. Then she read it again, and I watched her settle back into her chair like she needed the support. She knew, I said, and somehow my voice held steady. She knew I had this, and she still threw me out anyway. Mrs. Hollis didn't say anything, but the way her jaw locked up told me everything. She told me she'd help me reach out to the school directly, and she did. She absolutely did. She got on the phone the same day. But the truth was already too late. The acceptance window had slammed shut. They'd already moved down to the wait list. The woman on the other end of the line sounded genuinely heartbroken. If we'd heard from him back in December, she said softly, this would have been a done deal, but there's just nothing we can do now. I walked out of that meeting in a complete daze. And it wasn't because I'd lost the scholarship, it was because I'd never even had the chance to lose it. The choice had been ripped out of my hands before I knew the choice existed. My own mother had stolen my future, sat on it, buried it. For what? That's when the anger finally arrived. And let me tell you, it wasn't the loud kind. It wasn't the kind that makes you want to break something. It was the deep, quiet, low-frequency kind. The kind that hums in your chest like an engine somebody just turned on and forgot to turn off. For the next few days, I drifted through everything in a fog. I clocked into work. I sat in classes. But my brain kept rewinding to every single time I'd tried to make her proud, every time I scrubbed the kitchen counter spotless so she wouldn't blow up. Every report card I brought home with an A on it, secretly hoping that this one, finally, this one, would be the thing that made her actually see me. She never saw me. Not once. She saw what she needed me to be. A punching bag, a workhorse, a reason to feel sorry for herself, and the second I stopped fitting those job descriptions, she swapped me out without missing a beat. So what tipped me over the edge? What turned that humming, low-grade anger into something sharper, something focused, something with teeth? Tyler's birthday party, February 20th, a Saturday. I only found out because somebody tagged the apartment complex in a post on social media, and I followed the trail like a bloodhound on a scent. I honestly don't remember making the conscious choice to walk over there, but my feet just carried me. And there it was. She'd thrown him an actual party. Balloons, a banner, a whole cake with the words, "Welcome to the family, Tyler," written across the top in this looping cursive icing. I saw all of it. The videos, the group selfies, my mother drunk dancing in the living room with a red Solo cup in her hand like she was 21 again, Tyler grinning at the center of it all like he'd been the prince of that apartment his whole life. I stood outside the building for I don't even know how long. Hands jammed into my coat pockets, fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached, watching the warm yellow light spill out of those windows. I had zero intention of going in. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. But then she stepped outside for a smoke, exactly the way she always used to, and something inside me just clicked, snapped clean in half. I started walking toward her, slow, steady. She didn't even register me until I was maybe 4 feet away, and when she finally did, she stopped mid-drag. Then her face shifted into that smile. You know the one. That fake, polished smile she used to pull out for teachers and landlords and anyone she needed to charm. "Well, well," she said, taking a slow look up and down. "Look who finally grew a spine." I didn't say a word. She gestured with her cigarette toward the building behind her. "You're not invited, by the way." "Yeah," I said. "I figured." She took another drag. "Are you seriously still butthurt that I cut you loose? Grow up, Mason. Life's hard. I did you a favor." "You threw away my scholarship." Her smirk flatlined. "I found the letter," I said, and I could feel my voice tightening up in my throat, but I held it together. "You knew I got in. You hid it from me." "What?" She let out this short, ugly laugh. "Please, I knew you'd screw it up. You couldn't even keep your room clean. You think I was just going to sit back and let you blow somebody else's money on a dream you were going to bail on by the second semester?" You never even gave me a chance." "I gave you life," she snapped, her voice climbing. "I gave you 19 whole years. That's 19 more than I ever got from my own parents." "You didn't give me anything," I said, and I took a step closer. You took everything from me, and you're still taking, but not for much longer." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Is that a threat?" "No," I said. "It's a promise." And then I turned my back on her and I walked away. I could feel her staring at me the whole way down that block. I never once looked over my shoulder, not once. That was it, the breaking point, the last time I'd ever stand in front of that woman face to face. But it was nowhere near the last time she'd be hearing from me, because something flipped inside me that night. From that moment forward, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was planning. I'd love to tell you that after that confrontation, something noble clicked into gear inside my chest. That I marched off into some movie-style sunrise with my chin held high and my heart full of fire, halfway to a better life already. That's a great scene. It's just not what happened. What actually happened was that I completely fell apart. On the outside, sure, I kept the wheels turning. I showed up for shifts. I sat through my classes. I nodded along in meetings with my case manager. To anybody watching, I probably looked like just another worn-out teenager scratching off the days till graduation. But inside, I was coming undone at the seams. Standing in front of her like that, hearing her absolute certainty that I would crash and burn, it didn't just hurt. It scooped me out from the inside. Every emotion I'd been duct taping shut for months just came tearing through the wrapping. The rejection, the betrayal, the unbelievable ease with which she'd swapped me out like a piece of furniture she'd gotten tired of. I couldn't stop replaying it. How quickly she'd snatched away everything I'd built, not just the scholarship, something bigger. The belief that I even mattered as a person. And the worst part? The part that made me want to crawl out of my own skin. Some sick little corner of my brain still believed her. For a while there, I started rolling into work late. Not because I'd stopped caring, the opposite. I cared so much I couldn't sleep. My brain would just hit replay every single night. Her telling the neighbors I'd gone off to college, the photos of her cheesing with my replacement. That stupid cake with "Welcome to the family" piped across it like some kind of cruel inside joke. I'd lie flat on that shelter bunk, eyes glued to the ceiling, my pulse hammering away, and I'd wonder, what if she was right? What if I really was the kid who blew everything up? What if I was just plain broken? I bombed 2 quizzes back to back, forgot my gym uniform on a day I was supposed to test for the mile run, blew off a meeting with my counselor, tiny stuff. But it kept piling up. And then, one Friday afternoon, I just couldn't do it anymore. I bailed on school entirely. I parked myself on a bench behind the strip mall near the grocery store and stared at the cracks running through the asphalt until the sun started bleeding orange behind the rooftops. I didn't cry. I didn't punch anything. I just sat there, perfectly still, and the only thought running on a loop in my skull was, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep faking that I'm okay. That was the bottom, the actual floor. And the wild thing about rock bottom, nobody tells you this. It's silent down there. There's no soundtrack. There's no crowd watching to see what you'll do. There's no hand reaching down. You just sit there alone with your pain, and you've got 2 options. Stay there or move. So I moved. Just one tiny move. I picked up the phone and I called Mrs. Hollis. I genuinely don't remember pressing her number. What I remember is her voice on the other end, soft and steady, like somebody flipping on a lamp in a pitch-black room. I told her everything, and I don't just mean the stuff with my mother. I told her about the weight I'd been hauling around, the bone-deep exhaustion, the shame that wrapped around me like a second skin. I was bracing for some big motivational speech about how tough I was, how capable, how I'd come out the other side stronger. That's not what she said. She said, "Mason, sweetheart, you don't have to carry this alone anymore." And then She actually showed up for me, like, really showed up. That spring, the gears started turning a different way. She'd check in every few days, little texts. Did you eat today? Need help with that homework? Want me to look over that essay before you turn it in? Tiny lifelines, tossed to me, one after another, and slowly, those little ropes started dragging me up out of the fog. They reminded me of something I'd forgotten existed, the possibility that I wasn't invisible after all, that somebody actually saw me, and little by little, my whole mindset started flipping. I stopped wasting energy on proving my mother wrong. I started spending it on proving myself right, that I was worth more than the scraps she'd thrown me. That I could build something real, not out of pure rage or revenge, but out of this stubborn, quiet little voice in my chest that kept whispering, "You deserve better than this." So I poured myself into school. And when I say poured, I mean it. I was the first one in the room and the last one out. I asked questions until my teachers got tired of me. I took notes like the answers were going to save my life. Which, honestly, they kind of were. My grades didn't just bounce back, they climbed. And I started tutoring other kids in math and economics, not for the cash, but because I genuinely loved it. School was the first thing in my life that was completely, undeniably mine. And I was good at it. My evenings at the youth center got eaten up by reading, articles about small business, investment strategy, tax write-offs, anything that might give me even half a step on the world. I wanted to understand how things worked, in a way my mother never had. One of the volunteers at the shelter clocked it. His name was Marcus. Older guy, ex-military, the kind of dude who shoots straight and doesn't waste a syllable. He noticed how many hours I was logging in the computer lab. One night, he just dropped into the seat beside me and said, "Kid, you've got hustle. You ever thought about starting your own thing?" That sentence buried itself in my head like a splinter. My own thing. At first I waved it off, because come on. What was I supposed to start? I was broke. I was living in a shelter. I had no connections, no fancy diploma, no startup money. But Marcus didn't let it drop. He told me about how he used to flip used cell phones on Craigslist back in the day, how he'd started with a single cracked iPhone and turned it into a side hustle that covered his rent. "It's not about starting big, kid," he told me. "It's about starting smart." So I started. I'd noticed that the guys at the shelter were always running out of basics. Socks, toothpaste, razors, phone chargers, stuff like that. And nobody had the time or the bus fare to drag themselves all the way across town to whatever cheap store had it. So I found a dollar store close to my job that gave small bulk discounts, picked up a handful of things, and started reselling them in the common room for 50 cents over what I'd paid. And people lined up. Because what they were paying for wasn't really the toothpaste. It was the convenience. It was someone making their lives a little less hard. It wasn't much. It really wasn't. But it was mine. Every cent. I kept books. I tracked profits. I started learning what people wanted, when they wanted it, exactly how to price it. Every dollar I made got fed straight back in. I bought beat-up secondhand books about sales psychology and customer behavior. I went down YouTube rabbit holes on dropshipping, on affiliate marketing, on anything I could absorb. By the time summer rolled around, I had a fat binder full of notes and a spreadsheet so detailed it made me feel like some kind of Wall Street analyst hunched over a Bloomberg terminal. But more important than any of that, I had real confidence. Earned confidence. Not the loud, chest-puffing kind, the quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing you built something out of nothing with your own 2 hands, and that nobody on this earth can take it away from you. When graduation rolled around in June, I didn't invite anyone. Mrs. Hollis was in the front row anyway. So was Marcus, hollering and clapping like he'd raised me himself. No mother, no distant cousins, no long-lost relatives. Just me, walking across a stage in a cap and gown to grab a piece of paper that basically said, "You exist. You made it." For the first time in my whole life, I genuinely felt like I had a family. Not the kind you're handed at birth, the kind you build piece by piece, when everything else has burned to the ground. After the ceremony, I didn't cry. I just stood there in the gym, watching the crowd shuffle around, and it finally clicked. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I'd survived. I'd rebuilt, and I wasn't anywhere close to finished. That fall, I enrolled in community college, not Brookhaven Tech. That scholarship had been given away months ago, and there was no rewinding that clock. But honestly, it didn't matter anymore. I qualified for financial aid. I chased down every grant and local scholarship I could find. I took out one small loan to plug the gap, and I kept grinding. Evenings behind the register at the grocery store, weekends running my little supply hustle out of the shelter common room. I packed up my stuff and moved into a subsidized student housing unit. Tiny little place, the kind where you can practically touch all four walls if you stretch out your arms. But it was mine. I slept on a thin mattress laid right on the floor, hemmed in by stacks of textbooks and cardboard boxes full of dollar store toothpaste. And honestly, I was happy, because I wasn't in survival mode anymore. I was building, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, grade by grade. By the time my 20th birthday came around, I was running a full-on online shop right out of my dorm room. Nothing flashy, just thoughtfully curated care packages aimed at students and shelter programs. The basics, bundled together with intention. I'd personalize each one, slip in handwritten notes, and offer real discounts to the shelters I'd lived in myself. The whole thing about my mother, it wasn't eating me alive anymore the way it used to, but it was still there. A low hum somewhere in the back of my head. A frequency I couldn't quite tune out. Orders kept rolling in. Word started spreading. I wasn't just rebuilding my own life anymore. I was constructing something with weight to it, something with a future. But here's the thing. With all of it, the grades, the business, the new life I was stitching together, there was one thing I couldn't shake loose. That quiet little promise I'd made to myself in the dark of that shelter bunk. That one day she would regret every single thing, because while I was climbing my way up, something was happening across town. Something I could feel in my gut, something that was about to come crashing down. And here's what nobody tells you about revenge. It doesn't just walk up and hand itself to you. You don't get to skip the work. It has to be built, slowly, brick by brick. Not the way the movies sell it, where the underdog suddenly levels up, gets a glow-up makeover, and storms in for some big dramatic showdown that wraps everything up in 3 minutes flat. No. Real revenge, the kind that actually leaves a mark. It takes patience, timing, discipline. You don't win by being louder. You don't win with your fists. You win by becoming so successful, so impossible to ignore, that the person who wronged you has no choice but to look at you, recognize you, and quietly choke on every single decision that led them to this moment. And I was getting there. By 20, my little side gig had genuinely taken off. What started as a cardboard box of snacks and toiletries on a shelter common room table had grown into a real, modest, but steady e-commerce business. I'd named it Carryforth. Clean branding, simple design, and care packages tailored specifically for college students, low-income families, and shelters. I taught myself enough Shopify to build a real storefront. I dug into the basics of SEO. Every single penny I pulled in went straight back into inventory and site design. But it wasn't really about the money. Not for me. It was about creating something that no human being on this planet could ever rip away from me again. And I kept the whole thing quiet. No bragging, no social media flexing. Even my professors had no idea what I had going on the side. I didn't want a single set of eyes on me until I was ready to be seen. Because I still couldn't get that look off my mother's face out of my head. That smug, frozen little smirk she gave me the night I confronted her about the scholarship. The one that said, "You'll never be anything without me." I needed to burn that image out of my brain, and the only way to do that was to make her swallow every word she'd ever spat at me. But for that, success alone wasn't going to cut it. I needed a plan, And funny enough, the plan started taking shape because of Tyler. At first, I genuinely didn't care about the kid. He was just a pawn in the whole twisted game. A fresh, warm body for my mother to mold, parade around, and guilt trip into loyalty. I figured he'd burn out and vanish from her life the way everybody else eventually did. But then, one afternoon, out of absolutely nowhere, I got an email from this girl I'd had a couple of classes with back in high school. We weren't close, not really, acquaintances at best. The subject line read, "Hey, is this your cousin?" Inside was a screenshot from Reddit, one of those anonymous neighborhood community boards for our area. The thread title? Tyler from Unit 9 caught swiping phones from gym lockers. Again. I opened that thread with this awful, sick feeling crawling up the back of my neck. The post had a few blurry photos, so I started digging. A quick search of his full name on Facebook turned up a whole little ecosystem of public posts. Furious rants from people he'd scammed, PayPal chargeback complaints, weird, mismatched lost dog fundraisers that didn't quite add up. One comment said he'd been banned from 2 separate youth centers in the area. Another claimed he'd tried to unload stolen AirPods at some kiosk in the mall. And then I found an old post that gut-punched me, from Arizona. Watch out for this kid, known for lifting laptops out of schools. I just leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen, and the whole thing felt so painfully familiar. Because this was the kid she'd kicked me out for. This was the person she'd handed my bed, my room, my entire life to. And in that moment, something clicked into focus that I hadn't been able to see before. My mother hadn't just betrayed me. She'd gambled. She was running a play, trying to rewrite her own story by casting herself as the loving, devoted guardian of a troubled boy. The kind of woman she could brag about to the neighbors. The kind of woman she could post about and collect likes for. But she was way too arrogant to notice the obvious. She was just running the same broken pattern all over again. Different kid, same script. And right there, that was my first real opening. Not for revenge, not yet, for information. I started watching Tyler from a distance, online only, strictly through his social media, local Reddit threads, the occasional group chat thrown together by high school alumni. And let me tell you, this kid was sloppy. The kind of guy who bragged about the dumbest things. He'd post photos with thick stacks of cash, captioning them as proceeds from legit side hustles. He cranked out TikToks flexing in sneakers I instantly recognized. The exact ones I'd saved up to buy in my junior year, the ones I'd assumed I'd lost when I was packing up to leave. He was strutting around wearing pieces of my past, grinning like he'd earned every thread. That's when I set up the burner. A fresh Reddit account, a brand new Instagram profile, both completely untraceable, nothing tying them back to me. And I started using them, quietly, carefully, just dropping comments here and there on threads that involved him, floating questions, sparking conversations, asking the kind of loaded little stuff that nudges people toward connecting their own dots. Nothing obvious, nothing that would point a finger straight back at me, just enough to nudge people's curiosity awake. And then one sleepy Sunday, I was working a shift at the grocery store, and I looked up, and there she was. Walking in with a basket on her arm, hair done, cheap perfume trailing behind her like a cloud of denial. I didn't need to manufacture anything against her. His own track record was already the bomb. I was just going to hand people the match. She didn't even spot me, because I was bagging at the very end of the express lane, and her eyes were somewhere else entirely. But I clocked her instantly, her and the man walking next to her. Tall, probably late 40s, suit jacket thrown over a pair of jeans, the kind of look that's trying to say, I have money, but I'm humble about it, and failing on both counts. They weren't holding hands, but the way they moved together, that body language, yeah, that was undeniable. She was laughing, tossing her hair around, doing that performance giggle she always pulled out when she wanted something from somebody, and the two of them just glided right past my register. She didn't even glance my way, So I leaned over to the cashier working the lane next to mine and asked, real casual, "Hey, you happen to know who that guy is?" She didn't even need a second to think. "Oh, him? That's Marcus. He comes in pretty often, owns a few of those electronics shops downtown." Then she added, almost like an afterthought, "I think he's loaded." And just like that, opening number 2 had landed in my lap. Marcus Delaney, owner of 3 small electronics stores scattered across our county, the kind of guy who shot cheesy local commercials, kept a LinkedIn page, even ran an Instagram, mostly storefronts and trade show snapshots. And lately, yeah, photos of her. I waited her out, watched her finish her little shopping trip, watched the 2 of them disappear through the sliding doors, then asked to take my break early. I stepped outside, pulled out my phone, and went hunting through Marcus's profile. And buried way down in his feed, I found it. A Valentine's Day post, a nice dinner plate, a candle lit, soft glow on the table. And there, just barely creeping into the edge of the frame, her hand, with the same ring she'd worn for as long as I could remember. The caption underneath read, "Best V-Day I've had in years. Lucky guy." That sealed it for me. She had landed herself somebody new, somebody with actual money, which meant, for the first time in a long time, she had something real to lose. And that, right there, was my 3rd opening. The next 2 months I poured into building out the pieces, quiet, methodical, no rushing. First, I leveled up Carryforth, got serious about it, officially registered the business, set up a P.O. box, applied for a small micro-grant through a non-profit that supported young entrepreneurs, and to my own surprise, I actually got it. That money went straight into restocking inventory, automating chunks of my fulfillment process, and even hiring a part-time web designer off a freelance site to polish the whole brand into something that looked properly professional. Then I added a brand new section to the website. I called it Carryforth Partners, a program where local businesses could sponsor care packages for youth shelters. The deal came with branded thank you cards, social media shoutouts, and a little community partner badge for their site. Sounds wholesome, right? Sounds like a feel-good little community thing? That was the whole point. Guess who I reached out to first? Delaney Electronics. I used a fake name, posed as a marketing manager for Carryforth, sent over a formal pitch by email, complete with polished mock-ups and partnership tier breakdowns. I already knew he'd bite. He was exactly the kind of guy who needed to be seen as generous. Within a week of back-and-forth emails, I had him locked in. "This looks fantastic," his reply read. "Happy to donate some accessories and get featured. Just make sure you keep our brand visible. My girlfriend really loves this kind of community work." His girlfriend? Right. The same woman who had clearly fed him some elaborate fairy tale about how she used to work with kids or used to run support groups or whatever fiction she'd cooked up to make herself look like a saint. And now she was about to be publicly tied, brand, to my company. The company built from the dirt by the sun she'd thrown out like an old appliance. But I wasn't done yet. There was one piece left to assemble, receipts, so I started collecting them. Every single one. Every Reddit thread anyone had ever posted about Tyler. Every photograph of him holding stolen merchandise. Every comment from somebody claiming he owed them money. Every blurry, low-res gym security camera image somebody had pulled and shared. Every angry rant on Twitter. Every TikTok where he was waving fistfuls of cash around. I built a Google Drive folder for it. Organized everything by date, by type, by source. Wrote captions on every file, backed the whole thing up 6 different times in 6 different places, because if I was going to do this, I wasn't doing it half-cocked. I needed it airtight. And finally, the last piece. I placed an order from my own store, one of the standard Carryforth care packages, but this one had something extra inside, a typed letter, signed with my full real name and my real return address, written directly to Marcus. In that letter, I thanked him personally for supporting kids like me, and I mentioned, just casually, that I'd started the business after being kicked out of my house at the age of 19 with absolutely zero support from my family. That was it. No names, no accusations, nothing pointing in any specific direction. I didn't need to spell anything out. The timeline did the work. The tone did the work. The emotional weight underneath every sentence did the work. I wanted him to start asking questions. And more than anything, I wanted her to start sweating. Because at this point, I had everything: the data, the platform, the proof. But I wasn't ready to drop the bomb yet. Not quite. I wanted her to first witness who I'd become, to see what I had built up out of the rubble she'd walked away from. And then I wanted to hand her the documentation of her betrayal, the platform she couldn't unsee, and a reputation she was just barely starting to construct for herself, one that I could level with a single, quiet, unanswerable truth. That's when the real revenge was going to start. Not before. Because here's the thing about real vengeance, the very best kind. It doesn't kick the door in. It doesn't show up screaming in some parking lot. It doesn't roll in on a wave of spotlights and dramatic music. The best kind of revenge slips in quietly, pulls up a chair at the table you built with your own 2 hands, and just sits there, patient, calm, watching, waiting for the people who wronged you to slowly realize that the meal in front of them is just a plate full of their own consequences. And that is exactly what I did. After Marcus signed on as an official Carryforth partner, I made myself wait 3 full weeks before launching the campaign. Just enough breathing room to let the stage settle into place. I overhauled the site, made it look clean, sharp, minimalist, soft colors, crisp lines, big bold text thanking Delaney Electronics for sponsoring care packages for underprivileged youth. And then I added one last detail, the kicker. A spotlight feature pinned right on the homepage, a personal essay titled, "Kicked Out at 19, Now I'm Shipping Help to Kids Like Me." It was short, no more than 600 words, no names, no melodrama, no tearful pleading, just my voice, calm, clear, and honest in a way that hits like a freight train. I walked through the morning. I turned 19, the packed bag waiting at the door, the sound of the lock clicking shut behind me, the realization, sinking in slow, that I had never actually been loved. I'd just been tolerated for as long as the law required it. I wrote about sleeping in the back of a laundromat, about the scholarship I never got the chance to accept, about finding out that I had been quietly replaced inside my own home. I didn't beg for anyone's pity. I just told the truth. And at the very end of the essay, I thanked our new business partners, including, in my exact words, a local electronics company run by a man who reminds me that there really are kind, generous adults still out there in the world. I knew, without a single doubt in my mind, that my mother would see it. Marcus already followed the Carryforth Instagram account. I tagged him directly in the post that announced the story. And it took off almost immediately. Smaller accounts started reposting it. Local non-profit pages picked it up. A handful of community influencers shared it to their followers. Even the shelter where I'd once lived dropped a comment underneath, saying how proud they were of me. Small accounts started passing it around. Non-profit pages picked it up. A handful of local influencers re-shared it to their followers. The shelter I had once lived in even dropped a comment underneath, saying how proud they were of the man I'd grown into. And then, 3 days after the post went live, my inbox lit up. A message from Marcus. Short, just a few lines. "Hey Mason, just read your story on the website. Really powerful stuff. Forgive me for asking, but is your mother's name Diane?" I sat there staring at my screen, my pulse drumming in my ears, and finally I typed back 2 words. "Yeah, she is." He didn't respond right away. He didn't have to. I already knew exactly what I'd just done. I had lobbed a grenade right into the middle of the perfect little portrait he'd been carrying around of her in his head. 2 days later, my phone rang, number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, and there it was, her voice. All breathy and shaky, that wounded little tone she'd never once used with me when I actually needed it. "Hey, Mason. I saw what you wrote. I think we really need to talk. Please." I didn't react, didn't call back, didn't even acknowledge it. The next day, another voicemail. The day after that, another one. Each one more desperate than the last. Each one with a little more crack in her voice. And meanwhile, the Carryforth Instagram was exploding, new followers flooding in by the hour. Strangers were leaving comments under the Spotlight post, sharing their own stories, their own versions of being kicked out, replaced, erased. But buried in those hundreds of messages, a few comments started reading a little differently. Wait, is that the same Diane from Unit 9B? Hold on, she's his mother. She kicked him out for Tyler. That woman always rubbed me the wrong way. I knew something was off. And then somebody who absolutely wasn't me, dropped a link straight into the comments section. A link to those old Reddit threads, the ones about Tyler, the gym thefts, the PayPal scams, the stolen phones from locker rooms, and it spread like a brush fire in dry grass. The woman who had been carefully constructing this image of herself as some devoted guardian who saved a troubled boy? She had thrown her own son out into the cold to make room for a kid she was actively covering for, a kid with a growing rap sheet of theft. Once that fire caught, nobody on this earth was putting it out. Within days, people were stitching the whole timeline together on their own. They didn't need my help anymore. Marcus reached out one more time. The tone was different now, less curious, more heartbroken. "Mason, she told me you ran away. She said you were trouble. She said she'd rescued her nephew from an unsafe household. I believed her. I'm so sorry." I didn't bother responding. There wasn't anything left to say. He didn't make a scene about it. No big public statement, no drama. He just quietly ended his sponsorship and walked away. But over the next few days, every single photo of her vanished from his Instagram, one by one. And then came the dominoes. Tyler got arrested 2 days before I turned 21. He'd tried to sell stolen laptops on Facebook Marketplace under his actual real name. The cops traced the serial numbers back to a community center that had been robbed barely a week earlier, and he'd been caught on the security cameras like an amateur. And guess whose name turned up right after his on the local police blotter? You already know. Diane Holloway, 46 years old, charged with obstruction and possession of stolen property. The police came knocking on her door. She'd tried to stuff the laptops up in the crawl space and play dumb. Claimed they were donations. Claimed she had no idea they'd been stolen. The cops didn't buy a syllable of it. Her mugshot leaked online not long after. Grainy, washed out. She looked older, hollowed out, like a woman who had just figured out, way too late, that the party was over and her check had bounced. I saved that photo. I'm not even going to pretend I didn't. I kept it in a folder on my computer, just as a quiet little reminder that karma is real. It just doesn't always show up on your timeline. Marcus cut ties with her completely. I heard through somebody who worked at one of the stores that he was genuinely shaken up about the whole thing. She tried to play the victim, of course, claimed I was lying, claimed the internet had twisted everything around. But the receipts? The receipts were public. The truth didn't need me defending it. It was strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet. She lost the apartment not long after. Couldn't make rent without Marcus floating her. The local electronics shops stopped donating to whatever little community causes she'd been pretending to run. She tried to set up a GoFundMe to raise money for her legal fees. Somebody linked my essay right under it on the page, and her fundraiser never made it past $100. I never went to see her. I never picked up a phone to call, because I had already won. Not by yelling, not by slamming any doors, but by living a real life, by building something out of the rubble she'd left behind, by becoming the exact man she had told me I would never be. Today, I run Carryforth full-time. We ship nationwide now. We partner with shelters across 4 states. I've spoken at conferences. I mentor teenagers who've been through stuff way worse than what I lived through. My story has been featured on a couple of podcasts and even picked up by a nonprofit documentary crew. But I'm not telling you any of this so you'll feel bad for me. I'm telling you because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you won't. Sometimes family isn't the people whose blood you share. And sometimes the very best revenge is the quiet kind. The calculated kind. The kind served ice cold, with tracking numbers, delivery confirmation, and a handwritten thank you note tucked inside. Thanks so much for listening to this story. Drop your thoughts down in the comments, and make sure you subscribe to my channel, Cucumber Factory, so you don't miss any of the new videos coming up.